So first of all, the royal family, they call it the firm, and they are a family business. They have family meetings and family business meetings, and they communicate these two groups, but they become two separate entities.
Welcome everyone to another edition of the show. Today, I am joined by Dennis Jaffe, and he works with families to successfully manage and fulfill transfer of businesses, wealth, values, commitments, and legacies between generations. And for the last 40 years, he has been one of the early pioneers within this field of family enterprise consulting. He's currently Senior Research Fellow with the consulting firm Banyan Global Family Business Advisors and has authored a number of books and articles, the most recent titled Borrowed from Your Grandchildren, The Evolution of 100-Year Family Enterprises, and Cross Cultures, How Global Families Negotiate Change Across Generations. He is a family business fellow for Cornell University's Smith Family Business Institute and a faculty advisor with the Ultra High Net Worth Institute. He is also a regular contributor to the Forbes Leadership Channel, and in 2021, he was honored by Family Wealth Report with the Individual Thought Leader Award. Mr. Jaffe, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Afam. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to share what I do with wonderful people.
Thank you so much. Could you initially explain to my listeners what the term generative family, what that means, please?
Well, it's a reaction to the idea that people that people have that a kind of family creates wealth in a business, and then the next generation spend it down and lose it all. And what I see in the families that I've studied is what I call generativity, which I would define as continual wealth generation. And the other thing about generativity is it's not about money. Money is part of it, but a family can create wealth in other ways. They can create wealth with their role in the community. They can create wealth in the wonderful atmosphere they have to raise their children. They can create wealth all kinds of ways that are non-financial. And so generativity is about value creation, not wealth creation.
That's excellent, because often when people hear the term generational wealth, they tend to think of the financial component as opposed to looking at it as a holistic term.
Right, and that's important because families that have created wealth, don't only think about, oh, we have a lot of money, let's make more. It's a lot of us, it's hard to get behind this concept, but when you become a wealthy family, you begin to ask other questions, not more, but what do we do and what's important to us? And by having sufficient wealth, other questions come up. It isn't the end. It's you see it as the family see it as a beginning of a path to other things that they can do and other things that they like to do and other things that they can imagine and enjoy doing.
Great. So could you share with us a little bit about your work and the research that you've done into generative families? For example, why did you start these studies and what did you hope to achieve?
Well, I made a very, very good career move about 8 years ago, which is that I retired. And I had been a professor for 38 years, and that kind of kept me in one place and in kind of an enclosed space. And so there I was free, and I said, what are the questions? I've been in this field for a long time. What are the questions that are open? And two big questions came up. The first question being, are the advice that people are given, and particularly advice that's kind of Western based, is this really relevant for families? Is this something that is good for Western families, or is it good for families all over the world? The second thing, and the bigger project, is I just really, really love books like Built to Last, which are not about how to kind of be okay and survive, but to look at the best examples and to say, what can we learn from them that we can apply to ourselves if we want to be going on the path to greatness. So I said, well, what I want to do is travel all around the world. Before COVID, this was a wonderful thing to do. And I want to study families that are successful. And I'm studying families, not businesses. So I'm studying families that are successful over multiple generations as a business or a set of businesses. Sometimes they become a family office or an investment group, and that also are successful in keeping their identity as a family, even as they become not one family, but kind of a larger and larger group of families. So a multi-generational, third generation family is more like a tribe than a family. A family is a household to most of us. And when you talk about a third generation family, you're talking about cousins who may live in different countries, who travel, who share, but they have shared investments and a shared identity from a common ancestor that leads to their values and their sense of connection. So I began to study them, and I traveled for about 5 or 6 years, interviewing members of 2 generations of huge families that were the average wealth of these families were above $800 million in U.S. So that they were huge families, and they were past the third generation of control. And the reason for studying that was my definition of success: family identity, business success, connection, and having passed through the third generation. And what I found is that these families were actually relevant to first and second generation families, which is what most of us are part of if we're successful, because they could look back and they say, well, here we are in the third, fourth, fifth generation. Here's what we did when great grandpa founded this business, or when we found out that we were wealthier, we sold our business, or began to grow and be successful. Here's what we did to move ourselves forward that was really critical. So that's what the research did, and I don't do statistics and charts and surveys. I do interviews. So the reason the book that I wrote is 400 pages long, and most people say, don't write a long book, no one will read it. But the reason it's 400 pages long is because it's full of stories. And instead of saying, here is what to do, have a family meeting, create a board of directors, I tell the stories of families that have done that. And I show that you could say, have a family meeting, but that could take all kinds of different forms. Create a board, have an educational program. And so each time I kind of give a principle or theme, I tell a lot of stories about it. And the families, let me be clear, families came from every continent except Antarctica, I would point it out. No family businesses there. And from more than 20 countries. So while their majority are North American, still, as I continue to interview, and now I'm up to not 100, but 120 and still interviewing, we're getting more and more non-Western countries. And so we're really trying to create a global picture of family business.
I think that's one thing that's particularly interesting about you and the work that you do. You're actually building a global picture of this research. So within your travels, is there any non-Western study that you came across in particular that you found particularly interesting or surprising?
Well, so the book and the research focused on the commonalities. So the most startling thing for me, when you think about it, 100 families all over the world, the fact that I could take 100 and find some common themes, that is a real surprise and a welcome surprise. But then when I presented it, this is a really funny anecdote. This is really true. I presented it about 20 times, and every time I presented it, the first question I'd get after I made the presentation was exactly that. Well, what about other cultures? And what about other? So actually, after writing that book, I wrote a short book that's called Cross Cultures. And in Cross Cultures, we look at the different global cultures and how they influence the family business. So we found that there are three broad types of global culture. There's the Northern Europe and Western individualistic, Anglo-Saxon, kind of rule-based. Everybody has rights and personal dignity and rationality and rules and extensive legal structures. That's the Western model, and a lot of the stuff that we suggest to families look like Western, trust contracts and complex structures and things like that, and that's the Western model. Now, let's go over it. I spent a lot of time in South Asia, and worked with a lot of families there. The Asian family is in many ways the opposite of that. Asian families have a 5,000-year history of cooperation. They had very, very dense communities, and people had to get along. And they created a structure where harmony was important, not arguing, respecting the fact that your elders are not just a few people, but they represent 5,000 years of wisdom. And who are you to say, well, my idea is this? Well, so what? So the Western idea is about harmony. It's about respect for elders. It's because they don't want conflict. It's very ambiguous. You don't actually say what you mean. You really try to respect people and not hurt people. You try to do things indirectly. And there's a real sense of you are less important than the family. That's the opposite of the Western view. So that's a view in Asia. Then there's a third view, which is kind of a hybrid, but it's also a very ancient form, which is what we call the honor culture. And the honor culture is also hierarchical, and it's based on very patriarchal and very much about loyalty to the family. But it doesn't come from a place of trust of outsiders. So there's a distrust of outsiders. So the family has to stay together to survive. And so you have to respect the family. You have to be loyal. You don't trust strangers. You make deals with people that you trust and people that you've known for generations. And that's called the honor culture. And those are the three cultures. And a couple of things I found. One is that even with these three cultures, some of the things like getting together as a family and developing the next generation, more collective leadership, are, even though they challenge some of these styles, they're becoming more and more common. And the thing that we saw is that when you become a wealthy family, you come from a culture of origin. You may come from a small African village. You may come from being peasant in South Asia, but you're tremendously successful, and so your kids are educated, and they travel, they encounter other cultures. They often go, for example, to business school in the UK or in the US, and they learn Anglo-Saxon law. And in a business school in the West, you have to speak up. and you can't say, well, we're Asian and we don't really talk, we just listen. You won't get your degree. So what we find is that they're inside all of the wealthy families. There's a culture of origin, and the elders have this culture, but there's also a emerging new ideas from the younger generation. And so in the book Cross Cultures, we talk about how there's a cultural struggle inside every family, with the younger generation being multicultural, and that's often produces conflict in the family, and difficulty that has to be crossed, and the family has to realize that they're not one culture anymore. They're not a pure harmony culture or pure honor culture. They're a blended culture, and the family has to adopt. So that's the cultural thing is another layer of complexity, but there's a blending in the sense that in a way all of the wealthy businesses and wealthy communities around the world kind of spend more time with their peers. They go on vacations, they go to resorts, they're members of organizations, fraternal groups like the Young Presidents Organization, and so they become more identified with families around the world of wealth than they are of their original culture. And this is a challenge. Sometimes you get wealthy and you don't really feel like you're part of your village you came from and the place that you came from. You feel like it's awkward. So these are cultural problems.
That's
long answer,
but that's very interesting. Just what you mentioned earlier about the blended generational transition as well, because how do families endure these sometimes difficult challenges of generational transition? I mean, for example, you wrote a very interesting Forbes article this year about Harry and Meghan, which we know of very well here in the UK, and you talked about them separating.
Everywhere in the world, it's a global. Nobody doesn't know what's going on. So
that's
talk
right.
about your family being out in public.
Again, I mean, that was a very, very interesting situation, but I liked your take on that, because they were effectively separating from the crown or the royal family business, for want of a word. So as an observer of family businesses, what did you learn in particular from their situation?
Well, so first of all, the royal family, inside the family, they call it the firm. And they are a family business. And what Harry and Meghan are doing is what young people in the sometimes somebody in the family business says, well, I love you all, you're my family, which is what Harry and Meghan are saying, but I don't really want to be part of your business. And that's not an evil thing. It's maybe unusual in the culture. So culturally, to say I want to leave the family business if your business is being royalty, you don't leave in the same way, but they are doing an exit policy. So they're doing something that's common in family business, but royalty is kind of an honor structure, and so it's a very unusual to leave and to basically to desert the elders, and so it's culturally awkward, and so it's creating conflict. The fact that a second generation family member doesn't want to join the family business, that's fine. And then when they leave, they have to, as Harry and Meghan, they have to find their own sources of income. They have to get jobs. They have to, they have a buyout usually where they get some, they don't get cut off entirely. So there's some money that comes from them as heirs, and they try to maintain their contact with the family, but not as intimate as they were when they were all in business together and working together side by side. So it's a family business story, very much, and it's sad because of the public scrutiny and the way the pressure is on them. But I think if they were able to be more private, they probably could do a much better job than they are doing with all of the public scrutiny and the even the kind of family advisors being in the media and writing books and things like that. It's terrible to be a public family sometimes.
I mean, obviously, their situation is quite unique because of that public scrutiny that they have. But if we look at it from a more private standpoint, then what unique insights have you learned about how families transition and teach and prepare the next generation coming through?
Well, so one of the things that I see, and this is something that isn't just for large family businesses, this is also for smaller families, is that even whatever culture they're in, whatever place in the world they are, the next generation, the younger generation, goes from a patriarch usually, or a one-person leader who doesn't have to listen to anybody and can do what he wants, and maybe he listens to his spouse, or maybe there's collaboration, but basically it's one-person rule. And the next generation, the older generation may say, well, let's recreate that. I'm going to name one of my sons, maybe my oldest son or something. He's going to be the leader, and he's going to be just like me. Well, the new world, no matter where you are in the world, is not the same. So the second generation has to be more transparent. Even if you're the leader, again, here's a story. An Asian family, very, very, very high profile family. The patriarch, it was kind of a famous name, and he had 4 daughters, and then his 5th child was a son. And he, like an Asian patriarch, was planned and trained his son to take over the business. The son grew up, and so the son said, well, so I'm gonna have advice, and I'm gonna create a council with my 4 sisters. I love them, and hey, one's a lawyer and one's a doctor, and they're doing, one's in philanthropy. They're incredible. And the father says, what? That's not the way, kind of a leader is. A leader doesn't listen to everybody, tells people what to do. And he said, these are my older sisters. And the father said, I don't care. So he just went on, and so this was a dilemma, and he dealt with it basically by creating an informal council with his sisters, and just meeting every 2 weeks or so. They would get together and talk about it, and he just began to do it. So there was a culture change, and so you would call this an owner's council. You might call it a family council, but they began to create, instead of a one person does it all, he began to create a family governance system. Now the question would be, well, if the father has turned over the decision-making control to him, he can make the decisions, but he can say, whatever decisions I make, I'm going to talk to you, my sisters, first, and we're going to come to consensus. I'm not going to just act. So formally, he may be the leader, but informally, there's a structure. So those are the kinds of things that happen. The second and the third generation is even more people involved. And so the question comes up, how much transparency do we have inside the whole family? Is there a group, kind of an ownership council that gets formed that is totally transparent, and then other members are informed? And most important, as a family grows, the question arises, well, what about we want to have an annual family meeting. We want to do vacations together. We want to be involved in philanthropy. We want to do, kind of have an educational program and talk about our values. Those are non-financial activities. They're valued. So the family begins to say, we need to create a shared owners council, business structure, financial structure. Maybe it's a family office they create. And they also create a parallel structure which is the family structure for the non-financial things. And so over second or third generation, a family doesn't just have family meetings, they have family meetings and family business meetings. And they communicate, these two groups, but they become two separate entities.
That's really interesting. I came across a concept, I believe it's called the three circle system, whereby
Right.
you have the family, you also have the owners, and then you also
Right.
have management. And it's about keeping the three of those together in a very unique fashion, in essence. So how would you advise a family starting out to look at that if they've never done this before?
Well, there's a model that my colleagues at Banyan have developed called the four-room model. And you think of the family lives in a house, and on one side there's the family room, and this is where the family does things together. And then on the other side, there's a room for owners, and that's where the owners get together and talk about decisions. There's a room for the board of directors and the people, sometimes non-family members, who are directors and who are overseeing the business, family office, the financial, the assets, the investments, and then there's management. So there's kind of three rooms on the business side, and then a family room. So what the family has to do is, first of all, begin to meet and make a clear decision that the next generation wants to work together and wants to be together. One option for the families to say, "Hey, let's sell the business, or buy out, the Harry and Meghan branch, or let's sell the business and we'll all go our own ways, or we want to stay together." And so once they've done that, then they say, "What do we want to do?" Then the family creates a task force and begins to say, "Let's create family meetings and talk about philanthropy and talk about personal things that we do together, and vacations and family meetings. And then let's create a business structure and owners to say, what do we want as owners? What do we want to build? How do we want to expand the business, diversify the business? What do we want to do?" So creating the two, thinking of the next generation as having not one thing, but two entities, the family entity and the owner's business entity, and they're kind of working in parallel. They communicate, but they work together, and that's where families going in the second generation begin to create governance that will eventually become very complex if the family and the business grows exponentially.
That's great. That is a lot of really helpful information that you've provided here. I'm sure there's a lot there for the listeners to unpack and digest, but thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to say, as we wrap up this, edition of the show, there's a section that I call Build or Baffle. So it's a series of very rapid fire, quick questions with the intention of really encouraging the listener or providing them with a bit of information that's actually quite surprising that they hadn't expected before. So first question is there a study that you would like to do that if you could get access to anyone in the world, you would still go ahead and do?
I guess I would want to look at philanthropy and how families are using their wealth to make a sustainable world, and that there's a lot of interest in that, and mostly there's incredible global wealth involved in that, and I that would be the area that I'd focus on right now, because we all want to have a future.
Great. Next question. What has caused you to grow the most in your line of research?
In my line of research, it's been working with patriarchs and elders. As I become an elder myself, it's been really helping the elders see that the role of creating a great family is not the same as building a great business. And after all that work and all that success, they have to learn some new things and how to make that case, and how also looking at myself, what is a legacy? How do you become an elder? And that's my current work.
Great. And next question, what could schools do to teach family enterprise more, in your opinion?
Well, this is a big area. So schools need to get away from making it seem like a big, rational, high-tech business is what you're trying to create, and understand small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and complex family businesses. Not look at large corporations as their large public corporations as their model.
That's great. And finally, what's the best way that people can follow you or your work online or elsewhere?
Well, so I have a website, DennisJaffe.com, and that's where I put all my papers. So there's about 60 or 70 articles that you can download. Everything is free. I'm an open source person, and you can access all kinds of articles and things from my website, and my books you can access through Forbes. My columns, everything is kind of out there. I'm like a part of legacy work for me is I want my stuff, people to find my stuff accessible and use it, because what other use does it have?
That's great. Thank you very much. Dennis Jaffe, thank you very much for your insights and your wisdom today. Thanks for sharing the space with me today.
Thank you, Afam, and this is a wonderful podcast that you run.
Thank you very much.
Take care.